Canada hits its NATO target this Thursday night. After years of lagging behind, the country meets its commitment on defense spending.
Half a decade ahead of the original schedule.
Where the billions are being spent and the next goal Canada needs to reach. Iran keeps firing missiles as the U.S. president claims it's begging to make a deal.
And of course they negotiated, they've been obliterated.
And thousands of U.S. troops are amassing in the Middle East. Plus, banned from the Olympics, why trans women can no longer compete. And challenge accepted, the new tech allowing MLB players to dispute calls on the baseball diamond.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After intense pressure from the U.S. president and a sharp increase in defense spending by Prime Minister Mark Carney, NATO now says Canada has for the first time reached its defense spending target. And combined with European defense spending, which jumped by tens of billions of dollars in the last year, the Secretary General of NATO says the alliance is stronger than ever.
In 2025, for the first time, all allies met the goal agreed in 2014 to invest at least 2% of their GDP on defense. And many went much further.
But the U.S. president, who often denigrates NATO, even though the U.S. is a founding member of NATO, is calling his allies cowards for not helping with the war he and Israel's prime minister launched against Iran. Trump posted this today. The USA needs nothing from NATO, but never forget this very important point in time. Faced with that hostility, NATO members, including Canada, are increasingly shifting away from reliance on the U.S. David Akin has our top story tonight.
Today is a big day.
For the first time, Canada will meet commitments it made to its allies more than a decade ago on defense spending.
This morning, NATO confirmed that Canada has achieved its 2% defense expenditure target, half a decade ahead of the original schedule.
Canada had been one of NATO's spending laggards and had taken heat from allies like the United States for failing to meet its commitments.
In fact, we saw 20% increase in what Europe and Canada spent on defense in 2025 as compared with 2024.
Canada actually boosted year-over-year defense spending by 40%, mostly by giving everyone in uniform a big pay raise and by spending billions to improve housing on military bases. The opposition, though, says the boost in spending is all about creative accounting. For example, the Coast Guard was once a civilian expense item through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, but the Carney government transferred the Coast Guard and its budget to the Department of National Defense.
Over $10 billion that the Prime Minister is bragging about today comes from other government departments.
NATO figures show Canada was spending $23 billion on defense a decade ago. This year, it will spend more than $60 billion, and that is 2% of current GDP. But the target is changing. By 2035, all NATO members must spend 5% of GDP on core defense spending plus related security spending. Canada would be looking at spending at least $114 billion. Programs to build new Arctic ports or do quantum computing research will count towards those 2035 targets.
If we're better in AI, we're better in cyber, we're better connected in the north, we have better flood defenses, all those factors, we have a better country, and that's how we're going to meet it.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and other NATO leaders will meet in Turkey in July, where they will begin to flesh out the details of how they will meet those 2035 spending targets. Donna.
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. The Prime Minister chose Halifax to make the announcement. It is home to Canada's most populous military base, supporting more than 11,000 service and reserve members. Mark Carney is promising $3 billion for improvements on bases on Canada's east coast. Heidi Petracek explains what meeting NATO's 2% target means to the region.
We've relied too heavily on your dedication alone to keep Canadians secure.
The Prime Minister acknowledged Canada's military has been underfunded, then moved to put that in the past with new money targeting the East Coast.
We need to be ready.
Ottawa will inject more than $3 billion into base improvements, including $1.2 billion for power infrastructure at CFB Halifax Dockyard and Stadacona. $648 million for modernized hangars at 14 Wing Greenwood, and more than $1 billion to train soldiers at CFB Gagetown with new ground-based air defense systems. Mark Carney also hinted Ottawa's close to a final decision on a multi-billion-dollar spend on new submarines.
The guidance the minister has given is by the summer.
Atlantic Canada is not only home to major military bases, but it also has a growing defense and aerospace industry, more than 200 firms accounting for more than 10,000 jobs.
And this really matches the capabilities that we already have. We're just bringing it all together.
There are still challenges.
We don't want to be second-tier supplier, third-tier supplier.
This training simulation firm encouraging Ottawa to ensure future federal investments target smaller firms looking to scale up.
It means that the accessibility to those new investments is open to us, small medium enterprises.
Canada's Defence Industry Association emphasizing keeping up the pace will mean streamlining procurement.
They have done some pretty Herculean lifting to get the number of projects through the pipeline in the last little while. So what we're looking for now is, what is the future pipeline?
The Prime Minister says future spending will come through projects serving both defense and community needs. $500 billion promised over a decade on this coast and throughout the country. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
It is still a guessing game about what President Trump's strategy is over the war the U.S. and Israel started with Iran. On the one hand, Trump insists Iran wants a deal, and today he extended the deadline of his threat to bomb Iran's power plants until April 6th. His special envoy, Steve Witkoff, confirmed a 15-point peace proposal has been offered to Iran through intermediaries in Pakistan. But the U.S. also keeps sending more troops to the region. As Jackson Proskow reports, Trump could be playing for time.
Claiming to have struck 10,000 targets, the U.S. insists Iran's military has been obliterated, while Israel claims to have killed the key Iranian commander leading the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Yet Iran is still firing ballistic missiles at will, striking targets in Israel and throughout the Gulf, while inflicting untold damage on global energy supplies.
They are begging to make a deal, not me. They're begging to make a deal.
President Donald Trump now says there is a path to peace, but says it's up to Iran to convince him to halt the war. The White House offered up a 15-point action plan. Iranian officials quickly dismissed it.
If we can convince Iran that this is the inflection point with no good alternatives for them, other than more death and destruction, we have strong signs that this is a possibility.
It's hard to know if Trump is truly serious about ending the war.
I'm the opposite of desperate. I don't care. I want to know. In fact, we have other targets we want to hit.
He won't rule out taking over Iran's oil, but seems flexible about a Friday deadline for reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And yet the Pentagon is dispatching thousands more troops to the region in what could be preparation for a possible ground invasion, targeting Iran's Karg Island or its stockpiles of enriched uranium.
Once boots get put on the ground in Karg Island and other places, and I think more of the American people will move beyond thinking of this as a cartoon, but as something that really does impact America's standing in the world.
Iranian state media claims that more than 1 million fighters are being mobilized. Both countries are preparing for every possible outcome.
We have told Iran one last thing. Don't miscalculate again.
The bigger risk may be in the U.S. miscalculating the Iranian regime's fight for survival, which could leave the war trapped in an endless cycle of escalation. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
The bodies of the two young Air Canada pilots killed in that runway collision at New York's LaGuardia Airport on Sunday have been flown home. A repatriation flight left early this afternoon carrying Captain Antoine Fauré and First Officer Mackenzie Gunther. Mike Armstrong reports on the solemn journey.
The bodies of the pilots had been at a funeral home in Queens. They were moved Thursday morning to Newark Airport for the flight home. As the caskets of Antoine Fauré and Mackenzie Gunther were loaded onto the plane, they were saluted on the tarmac by other pilots. Now, the NTSB is releasing new video taken at LaGuardia Airport of the scene. They are the closest images so far of the wreckage, showing investigators combing through it. The aircraft and the fire truck were removed from the runway Wednesday night. Both runways at the airport have now reopened. According to the Port Authority, the runway where the crash happened and the infrastructure around it have been repaired, inspected, and confirmed to meet FAA regulations. The aircraft repatriating the bodies of the pilots made 2 stops. First in Ottawa, delivering co-pilot Mackenzie Gunther to his family. The second leg was to Montreal, returning pilot Antoine Forêt to his family. In both places, they were welcomed home by fellow pilots. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Today, the CEO of Air Canada said he is deeply saddened his inability to speak French has diverted attention away from the grief over those pilots' deaths. Michael Rousseau, who lives in Montreal, spoke only 2 words of French in a video message of condolence. In a written statement today, Rousseau said, despite many lessons over several years, unfortunately, I am still unable to express myself adequately in French. He says he is continuing efforts to improve, but members of Quebec's National Assembly say it's too little too late. Today, they passed a unanimous motion demanding Rousseau's resignation, saying he showed a lack of respect. Canada's Official Languages Commissioner has received more than 1,800 complaints about Rousseau's failure to speak French. The federal government is making long-awaited reforms to Canada's election laws. A recent public inquiry found emerging threats such as disinformation and foreign influence are putting Canada's electoral system at risk, and they called for lawmakers to protect Canada's democratic processes. Jillian Piper looks at what these planned reforms will do and whether they go far enough.
Foreign actors are increasingly and continuously attempting to interfere.
To counter that, Ottawa is proposing a suite of changes to Canada's Elections Act.
Canada's elections belong to Canadians. Outside money, influence, and threats have no place in them.
The amendments include banning deepfake videos of candidates, no longer allowing political parties to accept donations of cryptocurrency, and holding foreign actors outside of Canada responsible for interference. But this former CSIS director warns getting other countries to help enforce Canadian law will be difficult.
The foreign government is not going to help you apprehend the individuals who were actually involved.
The changes are informed by the public inquiry into foreign interference a year ago, which identified China and India as 2 of the countries targeting Canada's elections.
Welcome.
Since then, Ottawa has tried to rekindle relationships with those nations, but says it will still hold them accountable.
Canada will call out interference in our democratic processes, whatever or whoever the source.
The bill also looks to target long ballot protesters by limiting voters to signing only 1 candidate nomination paper. But that change won't be made in time for the Terrebonne by-election next month.
Having only 1 official agent by candidate instead of having one that can be an agent for all candidates will make a difference.
Ottawa is looking to enforce steeper penalties for those who don't follow the rules, including raising the maximum fines for individuals from $1,500 to $25,000 and boosting penalties for organizations up from $5,000 to $100,000. But this pro-democracy advocate who has faced transnational repression from China says he won't be satisfied until Ottawa makes good on its promise to create a foreign agent registry.
I hope that our government will wake up and say, look, enough is enough. This is time to act.
Earlier this month, the government appointed a Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner, Donna, but they have not provided a timeline as to when the registry will be up and running.
Okay, Jillian Piper in Ottawa, thank you. Coming up, why the International Olympic Committee is banning trans women from competition. The International Olympic Committee is banning transgender athletes from competing in the women's category, and all participants in future Olympic Games will have to undergo genetic testing to determine their biological sex. Taria Isri explains what's behind the move and why it's happening now.
At the Olympic Games, even the smallest margins can be the difference between victory and defeat.
She's the first woman to lead the International Olympic Committee. And Thursday, Kirsty Coventry announced a policy she says will protect women.
So it's absolutely clear that it would not be fair for biological males to compete in the female category. In addition, in some sports, it would simply not be safe.
The IOC has banned transgender athletes from women's events and will require competitors to undergo genetic testing.
It's the testosterone that's the primary driver of improved sports performance, of that performance advantage.
The rules will apply at the 2028 Summer Games in Los Angeles.
We're keeping men out of women's sports. Is that okay with 90% of the people?
The IOC now aligns with U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order barring trans athletes in women's college sports.
This was a priority for me way before President Trump came into his second term.
There are studies contradicting the IOC's position that there's a biological advantage. A 2024 British Journal of Sports Medicine study, partially funded by the IOC, found trans women may actually be at a disadvantage. But the decision is the latest flashpoint in a culture war in the US and Canada.
There's no need for this. It's done because of the rhetoric that's happening in society against trans people. There's no factual evidence.
Harrison Brown was the first trans professional hockey player and says transgender athletes in the Olympics are rare. Weightlifter Laurel Hubbard became the first openly trans woman to compete for New Zealand and came in last. The Canadian Olympic Committee calls this one of the most complicated issues it's facing and says it's reviewing the decision carefully. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
Problematic procurement ahead, why a program intended to help Indigenous businesses is being called a cascading failure. A new report has found the federal government is failing to uphold its own Indigenous procurement strategy. The federal Ombudsman calls the government's handling of the multi-billion-dollar program a cascading failure. And as Melissa Ridgen reports, he says it's the worst-run program he's ever seen. Melissa.
That's right, Donna. Procurement Ombudsman Alexander Yeglich had 34 pages of criticism for Indigenous Services Canada's management of the procurement program. It's meant to support Indigenous businesses by giving them 5% of the procurement pie, something the Liberals say they've done consistently since 2022. The Ombudsman disagrees.
That 5% we know, just based on what we saw, cannot be accurate. And so, again, when you're saying, oh, we're making a 5% contribution by way of procurement to Indigenous suppliers, that is absolutely inaccurate.
He found the program is so badly run, there's no way of knowing what the actual figure is. Yeglich called it shocking that the 30-year-old program was at no point working as intended because Indigenous Services Canada had systemic disregard for it, saying they even ignored other departments that flagged problems and failed to make sure companies in the program were actually Indigenous.
I would say this is the worst that we've seen in terms of a systemic review. Having a global strategy that's so well known be so poorly managed is difficult to understand.
The report broadly confirms what a 2024 Global News investigation with the First Nations University of Canada found, and what First Nations, Inuit and Métis leaders have long said was going on.
It's absolutely commonly known from us, the Indigenous, that there are people out there who are not Indigenous that have these businesses claiming they're Indigenous.
The report calls on Indigenous industry leaders to immediately be involved.
I hope that the program is turned over to Indigenous peoples to manage.
The opposition Conservatives support that.
We believe in less government and we believe in the nations defining themselves, and that includes defining their own businesses. And so 100% we agree that the nation should start defining who their businesses are and take more management and ownership of these programs in partnership with federal procurement aspects.
Now, the procurement ombudsman typically checks back every 2 years on the progress of his recommendations, but the severity of what he calls cascading failures is so bad, he expects progress reports every 6 months from Indigenous Services Canada. Donna.
Okay, Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg, thank you. New technology at home plate next, why robot umpires are being brought into baseball. A new season of Major League Baseball is underway, and while another historic playoff run for the Toronto Blue Jays may be too much to hope for, some history was made on the ball field last night. Eric Sorensen explains why a new automated system known as robot umpires are keeping watch over the pitches.
On his first pitch of the season, Aaron Judge could have touched his helmet. New jargon for a new era in baseball to challenge the historic and absolute authority of umpires to call every ball and strike without corrections. For the first time, a chance to reverse bad calls. Teams will have 2 challenges per game, another for every challenge upheld. Only the pitcher, the catcher, and the batter can make a challenge, and it must be immediate. So, when to do it.
There's going to be at-bats where there's going to be balls that are a ball off the plate. They're going to be called strikes like they have been for 100 years. Fine. It's baseball. We want to have the ability to take advantage of the challenge when the spot is big.
And history was made when Yankees batter Jose Caballero challenged a strike call. The automated balls and strike system suggested the ump got it right this time. The strike zone is based on a player's actual height, whether 5'11" Kyle Schwarber or 6'7" Aaron Judge. The strike zone starts at 27% of the player's height, around the knees, to 53.5% of his total height. Judge's strike zone is naturally bigger. Analysis has shown that umpires have called more strikes outside his strike zone, usually below the knees, than for any other player in baseball. The aim is to make the game fair and get the calls right.
We've identified some opportunities to make some improvements. I think we're just trying to bring out kind of the best version of the game. That's really our goal.
Players do seem to recognize that umpires remain an important part of the game.
You definitely got to have a human aspect of the game. A lot of guys say they need someone to argue with, so.
In the minors and preseason, challenges were successful only half the time. Was all this on Aaron Judge's mind in his first game? He struck out his first 4 times, twice on called strikes. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Humboldt Lake, Saskatchewan. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. And thanks for watching. Jeff Semple is at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.